right. So you tune into LaVeist and ClaVille, which we're continuing in this special section that we're doing on Justice for George Floyd, Part 5, moving towards solutions. So after the guilty verdict against former police officer, now convicted felon, Derek Chauvin, the question is, where do we go from here? How does the verdict impact America's perception of Black Americans and their encounters with law enforcement? Will local police departments start to police Black and brown communities differently? How is this going to impact recruitment, training, law enforcement? And, ClaVille, I think about this because what is really at the root of why these encounters, again, over minor offenses, like we were talking about, oftentimes, end in such drastic results, death, ultimate decision, to take another person's life. And a lot of it is rooted in the police culture. We talked about that before, about how it even stems back in this nation originally from the slave patrols, and it has evolved over time. So police culture very much at its root has been about keeping Black people oppressed in place, protecting property, right? And that there's been in that process, a dehumanization mindset that is endemic in the culture. And in fact, I argue that what Derek Chauvin was doing in that moment and how he oppressed and had his knee against George Floyd's neck like that was that he was actually indoctrinating his fellow officers into the culture. There were at least 2 rookies there on the scene. And there were he was the senior officer there that was supposed to be training. So very much so what he was doing was showing, okay, you may have learned about community policing, respect, and total community policing in the academy. But forget about what you learned in the academy. This is how it goes on in the streets. I've talked to several officers, I've been a reporter, talked off and have several officers that are actually friends, fraternity brothers. I can tell you, former police chief of New York, Philip Banks, good friend of mine. And they will tell you honestly about this issue of the culture and how when you come out of the academy, oftentimes, once you get out on the street, the word on the street amongst the cops and already out on the beat is forget about what you learned on the. And it's like, how can you forget about everything that you learned in the academy? Immediately. So telling you that they are pledging loyalty to this culture that is about dehumanizing Black and brown people and indigenous people oftentimes. And this is where the defund the police, abolish police movement is really getting at. I mean, the wording of it may have caused confusion for a lot of it. They could have chosen better words because not everybody is saying we don't want police at all. What they're saying is we want a defunding of resources going towards militarization of police. We want police to be funded and trained in ways that they are truly serving the community. And if it causes a reset, like some communities have done, like Camden, did a whole reset on their police department, had people reapply for their jobs. If that's what it takes to get at the culture, to root out this evil that is in the culture, so that the good cops who really are there to protect and serve, white and Black, the good ones that really want to do that, can be able to be predominant in these forces rather than these many bad apples.
Yeah, well, I think you're exactly right. And I would say that the guilty verdict of now convicted felon Derek Chauvin for the murder of George Floyd should be a pause. It should be a moment where police departments and communities start to really think about how policing practices and what we call community policing really should go. President Obama tried to give police departments an opportunity to voluntarily enact and be a part of creating policing for the 21st century, creating the commission and voluntarily pushing them to participate in this project. Many pushed against it. A lot of very conservative areas of policing in our country pushed against it. And also some of our bigger cities and urban areas pushed against it as well. Because again, going back to that culture of what former long-term chief William H. Parker coined as the blue line, right? Nobody over it, nobody crosses over, nobody goes over it, either way. And that culture itself, and every organization, every profession has a culture, but some cultures are a bit more rotten than others. And we see and if those cultures aren't checked, then what happens, then it gets worse, it gets worse, it gets worse.
Right.
And we see that a lot now that this victimization of African American, Black and brown people by police is not just, it just didn't start happening. It's just being filmed.
Right.
And it's being shown. We talk about how Rodney King should have really been the wake-up call. You have a camera and a guy who basically just caught it. His wife girlfriend bought him a VHS video camera. He was just trying it out.
Big old camera on top of his shoulder. He's just trying.
Yeah, Will, he just happens to stick it out of the window and catch a random. Obviously, it's happened more than that because we like Watts, right? We talked about how when you talk about, the hot summer, I think of 68, where you have over 150 civil unrest, history sometimes call it riots, racial riots, and we look at these big uprisings. A lot of them were started, I think every last one, by an interaction of police and a Black individual, right? So this is being filmed. And this is action that has been taken over and over again. I go back to Rodney King. I remember seeing those 8 officers standing around, 4 taking turns and beating him over and over and over and over again with those billy clubs. Now those clubs are reinforced. I mean, it's just not regular wood, right? Over and over again. And you see the pictures of his eyes and his jaw. They're kicking him and so forth. They're not trying to restrain him.
Right.
They're not trying to hog tie him and put him in prone position. And if they say, oh, he has superhuman strength. And this is a fallacy of
They're
Black.
trying to beat him down and punish him.
Exactly.
And teach him, it's this teach him a lesson. How dare you, how dare you defy us, or whatever the case is, and we have power over you. We have control over you.
And Will, I heard one person making a comment said it best. It was a Black female. She said, police departments don't want Black men to be compliant. They want them to be submissive.
Mm-hmm.
They want to be subjected to that dehumanization that we're talking about. And I sat there and I listened to that comment. I said, she's right. I mean, that sums it up, because when we take a look at other individuals who are stopped by police, white individuals, and we've seen plenty, filmings that come across YouTube and social media that shows how police restrain themselves, right? We saw it on January 6th during the insurrection.
Yeah.
They were forbidden. The Capitol Police were forbidden from using aggressive tactics. That's coming out in the 9/11 style commission report. That's what came out in the hearing on Capitol Hill that pushed for this report. They were forbidden from using their more aggressive tactics against a 99% easy. Of course, you saw a speck of Black here and there. You saw one Black guy standing in the galley. Like, what am I doing here?
One fool, right? One fool among many fools, but fools who are terrorists in a sense.
Domestic terror.
And you would think that storming the Capitol would be a justified reaction of aggressive force. You would say, okay,
Absolutely.
just like there was a woman in the storming of the Capitol who lost her life because, as told several times, not to storm through this door, not to, a Capitol Police officer did fire his weapon.
And was clear, rightfully so.
Yeah. So the thing is we have these situations where there are justifiable use of force and there's tremendous restraint. And when it comes to dealing with predominantly white encounters with police, but then when it talks about Black people encountering police, there's this extreme reaction, and we're talking about relatively minor offenses. So when we talk about solutions, again, we got to look deep into the culture of policing that says that is okay to come back with an extreme reaction, to come into a situation not looking to de-escalate, but looking to dehumanize. And like you said, teach these lessons. That's a number one that has to happen. We also need to have police trained and equipped to deal with situations that are best dealt with by police. I, as a reporter who's covered police, a columnist who's dealt with police officers and had opportunities to honestly sit down with them and understand something about what their world is really like, as well as, like I said, having friends who are police officers. These are human beings. And a lot of times these men and women, they're not looking to come into situations and not survive them themselves. A lot of times their number one priority is getting back home to their own families, to their own loved ones, right? So a lot of times we're putting police in these situations that they're not really fully equipped and trained for either. One of the worst situations any police officer wants to walk up into is a domestic dispute situation. They don't want to come up in someone's home. They have no understanding of what's in that home, what may or may not be. They can't control the environment. They have to have their head on a swivel. You got a crowd around. That's not an environment they want to be in. So when we talk about defunding police and looking at doing policing in a different way, maybe there's a different type of officer, a different type of law enforcement person who's equipped with de-escalation skills and mental health skills that needs to be coming on to answering that call. Certainly, I know that you don't need police out on the corners answering a call having to do with somebody allegedly selling loose cigarettes on the corner.
Right.
Why would you want police? Don't they have better, more important things to be focused on?
Right.
More important, real crimes?
Will, think about that, Will. Eric Garner was put in a chokehold. Same words, I can't breathe, and was killed. And I say murder, even though the officers didn't face any charges or disciplinary actions that they should have really faced. I mean, you had one, I think, went into investigation that put the actual chokehold on him. And I think lost his job, but I mean, he still got his freedom. He still has an opportunity, to work, right? But loose cigarettes, I mean, to your point, he lost his life selling loose cigarettes outside of a convenience store before people go in. So basically, it was also an economic issue which led to that. And the person inside the store, that owned the store, said, "Oh no, I can't have this competition." Right.
Right.
And so, again, back to solutions. Right now, police departments and policing in America and policing in Black communities should not be. First of all, we have to eliminate the military style.
Absolutely.
We have to eliminate that. We have to humanize. People living in either white communities, Hispanic communities, Black communities, Jewish communities, other immigrant communities, whatever the case may be, mixed communities. We're all humans, right? There's a certain type of crime and what we call general crime and behavior that happens in all these communities. So therefore, there should be training that happens, general training. But then, if you're going to police an area that has a lot of poverty, or police a community that has a lot of individuals working in what we call the underground economy, and when I say underground, I'm not speaking of illegal activity. I'm speaking of people that are washing cars for cash money, right? Right. People who are picking up, cans for recycling.
Kind of cash exchanges, under the radar of the.
Absolutely. So, and we grew up around that, Will, and we, and I still frequent areas, my church in the area where I see this on a consistent basis, right? So if I see a person doing something like that, I don't think that they're suspicious. I don't think that we should call the police on them. I'm like, hey, what's up? What's going on? Good to see you. That type of thing. So it's understanding the culture of communities that you serve and not policing to a point where you now put them under surveillance and like it's a war zone,
Right.
It's a community exchange. Will, I'm telling you, the more that happens, the more police will get friendlier approach by individuals in those communities.
But,
They'll see the police as their friend,
right.
not as someone coming in terrorizing.
And what I think is that in the training and in many of the policing that has gone on in different generations, that's not a foreign thing. Police probably are trained, I would think, they're trained to think that way and to approach situations like that in the academy. But if after you leave the academy, you've got senior officers like Derek Chauvin telling you, forget everything you learned in the academy, and you have the unions that is supporting that kind of mentality, forget everything that you learned in the academy, then that speaks to the culture. That's the culture problem. And that has to be, eradicated, because we continue to see these incidences that occur are blowing up because of that cultural mindset that forget what you learned in the academy. This is how it goes on in the streets. Our job is to suppress and teach these people a lesson rather than we're here serving human beings. And I argue that it doesn't serve police officers well either. It does not serve them. Anytime you dehumanize someone else, you dehumanize a little bit of yourself with each moment as well.
Absolutely.
And again, you have police officers who are inside fighting because they believe in the craft of community policing. They're fighting for it, and they're going up against barriers because of, again, the culture. One of the things we saw that was very positive in the Chauvin cases that we saw the police chief on the stand admitting and others within the force.
The training officers.
Yeah, admitting that, look, this is unacceptable. And I think that that's very important, that we have to identify allies within and outside these systems who can work together for what is right, for what everyone really wants. And that is equal justice under the law, regardless of what your race is.
Absolutely. When we talk about the type of police that are needed, immediately what came to mind was a 1988 movie called Colors. And we know that was based upon LAPD police and interaction with street gangs, the Crips and the Bloods and so forth.
Right.
A scene that sticks out to me is when you have this rookie cop, Sean Penn. He's very cocky. He's ready to rough people up. And he's with the senior officer played by Robert Duvall. And they come on a scene, and immediately he comes up, Robert Duvall gets out of the vehicle, and immediately Sean Penn gets a shotgun, right? He's like, no. He's like, put that up. This is not how you do it. He goes to the quote unquote senior, the OG gangster who's there. Robert Duvall's talking to him. The OG gangster's talking to him. He was like, look, you got these young guys doing X, Y, Z, I want to make sure you keep it down. He said, don't worry, I'll get a grip on him, And he's like, I appreciate it. And they have a little friendly exchange, and then they get back in the car.
Right.
And he tells Sean Penn, he said, listen, that's not how you police this area, basically. That's not how you go into these situations. And that scene sticks out to me. That was 1988. But that scene sticks out to me because what was avoided was another tragedy.
Right.
Right? That's what was avoided. So again, it's what we call common sense. I call it common sense approach to everyday problems. There is a common sense solution to everyday problems. Now, let's keep in mind, again, a lot of times these situations can be de-escalated. They can be de-escalated.
Absolutely.
As a matter of fact, in the recent incident, and we talked about this with the lieutenant
in Virginia. Yeah.
Yeah, in Virginia, in Windsor, where the police captain, even though he said that the lieutenant did not need an apology, which I think was wrong, he should have, because he could have found a way to start to de-escalate scrutiny on the Windsor police, which I think he escalated it.
Yeah.
He said that his officer missed an opportunity, Gutierrez, to de-escalate.
Absolutely.
Several times.
It was the Army officer who was the calm one. He was calm. He was calm throughout the whole thing. They're standing there with guns drawn, yelling at him and telling, yeah, you should be scared. And this, I mean, come on. Who is supposed to be the de-escalator in this situation? That's the culture. The culture.
And that's a perfect example, Will. when that officer basically was threatening his life, saying you should be afraid. At that point, if an officer tells me that it's as pitch black as it was, even though I'm at a gas station, so you're on that country road in the backwoods. No, somebody can fire a gun and they probably won't hear it because they're asleep. Yes, that now not only affects me in that moment, but it affects me anytime I have an encounter with police.
And that was a Latino officer dealing with a fellow Latino. That was a Latino officer dealing with an Afro-Latino. That was the element there, because he didn't know whether he's Latino or not at that point. He saw a black face. But he's a Latino officer that you would think part of why he went into the force was to make a difference in community. We talk about the need for more diversification, and yet he is engaging in the same cultural mindset: control, dehumanize, fear, bring fear to the table.
And Will, you talk about it a lot, being a part of the Afro-Latino community. This is just not an American problem.
Right.
This is a worldwide problem. Black and brown people are catching it all around the world, by a system created to systematically discriminate, oppress, suppress, and dehumanize. So I think that when we talk about solutions, it's not just solution in policing, but it's got to be a systematic solution.
Right.
Because I believe that the discrimination and the issues that we see in our police departments is not just an anomaly. It's not something that happens in a vacuum. It is a byproduct of the systematic racism and the miseducation of, I believe, and I call it the miseducation of white America, and of course, the classic miseducation of the Negro, where we're taught to believe that one group is better than the other.
Right.
We're taught to believe that one group is human, another group is subhuman. We're taught to believe that one group should have, another group should not have. We're taught to believe that one group can do wrong and get away with it, and another group cannot. We're taught to believe that the system works for one group and not others.
Right.
And when we're taught to believe that, and is reinforced by images that we see throughout our culture, television, advertising,
throughout all of our lives,
all of our lives. Again, it becomes a systematic issue, a systematic approach to finding these solutions. Now, we got to start, in policing. And of course, some corporations have started acknowledging their role. Some institutions have started. We talk about the movement of universities and slavery, acknowledging their history. Georgetown University is one that really made a strong push to acknowledge their past transgressions and to make it right. Amongst them. As a matter of fact, the president of Georgetown University actually traveled to the plantation. And I talk about this, the plantation was located behind the university, Southern University, HBCU, the only university with a 5-campus system. It sold to that plantation in order to keep the university afloat. And they went to those ancestors, the descendants of those slaves, former slaves, and where they were buried and so forth. We have corporations who are acknowledging, their past transgressions, and they're starting the conversation. So conversations are good, but we need policy and we need action.
Absolutely. And that's where that's one of my pet peeves, is that we keep talking about conversation. And I think about, was Harriet Tubman trying to have a conversation? She was trying to get slaves free, and she went and did it. With the Massachusetts 54th was talking about having a conversation. Was the Harlem Hellfighters talking about having a conversation? No, they went, took up arms, went and took action and fought for this country. So how we've been sort of duped, I believe, to a certain degree, into saying that we want to have this conversation is beyond me. If you're looking at the arc of history that you just broke down so deeply, talking about how things have happened from generations that have led us to this point. Why are we talking about having conversation? What we need is another thing. We need action. An example of action, when you talk about education, you spot on, is we need an education system that gives us a deep dive into undoing the racism that has been done. There are so many
Absolutely.
stories. There are so many situations that have happened that has just been buried in history, right? And we need to really do
Tulsa riots.
from
The
the
Tulsa,
Tulsa riots, so many.
well, again, we call it the Tulsa riot, but it wasn't a riot. It was the Tulsa massacre.
Yeah, the Tulsa massacre. I mean, so we need to do a deep dive into. There are groups that do this work of undoing racism. We're really doing a deep dive into deconstructing how racism has been developed, how it is affecting us, how it has affected us individually and corporately, and
Absolutely.
the things that we need to do in our individual lives to undo it, to be aware of it. So when you're interacting with friends, when you're interacting in your companies, when you're interacting at your church, you understand how to play a role in undoing it. There are organizations that do this. And so when you mention companies, companies should be engaging in this with their employees. We should be engaging in it in our educational institutions so that people are not coming up saying, how do you come up in the city of Tulsa and not know about the Tulsa massacre? But the education systems has been intentionally constructed in such a way that that becomes ignored. So the more people don't know about it, the more they figure it doesn't matter. But then all of what we're dealing with now in our society with lands that have been taken from people, all of that has a very real effect now. Because if you had land taken from you generations ago, that was all of that up until now, for example, is missed opportunities of generating wealth from that land. So there's a direct connection to these things. So when people are talking about reparations, that's a direct connection. It's not just about going all the way to slavery and whether you can find descendants. You can talk about reparations just looking at some recent instances that have happened, like in the 50s and redlining and people being prevented from being able to acquire business loans or acquire land or having land taken from them. Those are the types of things where you talk about change, doing a deep dive, an honest dive into those things and really re-educating ourselves out of this lie that, as you said, one group of people, just because of skin color, is supposed to be better and always in a higher position and station, higher level of the caste system than other groups of people. It's a lie, and it doesn't serve us well as a country at all. It doesn't.
Well, you're exactly right. And I think as we talk about these solutions, I think what not just African Americans and Black Americans should do, but America itself, is that we have a moment.
Mm-hmm.
This is, this moment, I think, will not come back again if we don't take advantage of it right now. I mean, we'll probably have to see another century before we see some type of moment like this. This is our opportunity. This is our time to push, our time to move, our time to understand that our past wrongs are keeping us from moving toward a more prosperous, a more inclusive, more respectable, and a better future for America and Americans living in it.
Amen.
So I hope that we do take a pause. I hope that we do take this opportunity to really understand, each other from a humanity standpoint. Because at the end of the day, discrimination and racism is not a Black problem. It's a humanity problem.
That's right.
That was created by, again, white Americans who wanted to keep African Americans and other people of color down. So, again, there's so much more that we could talk about. And of course, we'll deal with this, reparations and other issues and policing in the 21st century in the future. But we got to close this out. So thank you again for joining us for this special series of Justice for George Floyd, moving towards solutions. If you like this, again, follow us on our social media at LaVeist and ClaVille. Follow, like, share, comment on Facebook and other social media. Thank you to Ben Bailey, our producer, for all that he does. And to us, that's the way it is. We'll see you next time.